Believe that there is a demonic, godlike devil creature. There's no malevolent being that can force us to do evil deeds in the world. There's no devious, wicked angel that can grant us our heart's desire, if only we would sell our souls, whatever that means. One of the beautiful consequences of believing in only one God is that there can be no anti-God, no nefarious deity that causes horrible things to happen in our world. There's just the one God who created us all and who loves us as any parent would love their children, and who is constantly trying to encourage us to do what is right and what is good and what is kind and compassionate. We do, however, have a concept of a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination. This is an all too human desire to be selfish, to be self-destructive, and to be greedy. A desire to control others, or to abuse them, or to rob them of their human dignity. Fortunately, we also have a Yetzer HaTov, a good inclination. This is the desire to help others, to nurture ourselves, to take care of our own mental and physical health, and to use our talents and resources to bring hope and healing to the world. The struggle in human life is to ignore the vanities of the Yetzer Hara and to cultivate our desires to be good. In our Torah portion this morning, Pharaoh can be seen as struggling with his own Yetzer Hara. He assaults his kingdom simply because he refused to let the Israelites go free. It is a normal and frequently asked question. What was Pharaoh's problem? Why did he remain so obstinate in the face of so much destruction? Sure, the Torah tells us that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Just when Pharaoh seemed to relent, God, it would seem, interfered with Pharaoh's free will to strengthen his resolve against the plagues. But that plain reading of the text leaves us with a serious moral predicament of biblical proportions. How could God do that to someone? Not only did that deprive a human being of one of the unique qualities of humanity, our free will, it caused untold horrors to happen to hundreds of thousands of innocent Egyptians. How could God do that? In the words of our ancestor Abraham, shall not the judge of all the earth do justice? But how else to explain Pharaoh's unbelievable intransigence? And how can we interpret the text that tells us in so many words that God did harden Pharaoh's heart? In order to understand the Pharaoh's decisions, we first need to consider the problem from his perspective. The great, awesome, and awe-inspiring buildings and structures of Egypt could not have been built without a tremendous amount of slave labor. Without modern machinery, constructing the great buildings of ancient Egypt, whether it was the pyramids or the Sphinx or the storehouses of Pitom and Ramses, it required the manpower of tens of thousands of people. And no ancient empire could afford to pay that many people a standard wage in order to complete these impressive monuments. I should add, by the way, that the Israelites did not build the pyramids of Egypt, contrary to popular belief. The pyramids were constructed centuries earlier, according to archaeologists, and the Bible specifically says the Israelites built storehouses in Pitom and Ramses, which were also pretty impressive structures. Anyway, freeing the slaves was not by any means an easy decision to make. The Pharaoh needed, or felt he needed, the slave labor to satisfy his lust for an ostentatious display of his power. How could he free his slaves? What would he do the next time he wanted to go on a monumental building spree? Even if he enslaved another nation, they would know that he could be forced to free them with signs and wonders. So despite the fact that his kingdom was crashing down on his head with all these horrific plagues, the Pharaoh simply could not allow himself to free his slaves. He was, in a sense, addicted to the institution of slavery. It was, you might say, a bad habit that he couldn't quit. So how do we explain the text that says God hardened Pharaoh's heart? One way to understand this is to simply recognize that we human beings are all vulnerable to some form of bad habits or addictions of one kind or another. Whether it is binging on some television series, playing computer games for too many hours, procrastinating too long before we do something we know we need to do, or maybe just eating too many chocolates. Most of us are guilty of some kind of bad habits that we feel we just cannot change. So perhaps God didn't harden Pharaoh's heart per se, but rather it seems that it's part of human nature that includes the potential for obsessive behaviors that over time become dangerous and destructive. I mean, let's think about it. A desire to build monuments is not inherently bad, as long as you can pay a fair wage to the workers who build them. But if you desire to build more than you can afford, and so you have to resort to slave labor to manufacture them, then you have turned your desire into a horror for thousands of people that you must enslave for your own power and wealth. On a much more personal scale, many of us find ourselves doing things that hurt ourselves or others because we have become obsessive about them. Our sages were aware of this peculiar obsessive nature of human beings, and they described this yetzer, this addictive desire, as something that starts out as a mild and a gentle fascination, but later becomes aggressively assertive. Rabbi Akiva, for instance, said, in the beginning it's like a thin thread spun by a spider, but in the end it becomes as thick as a ship's rope. We can easily break out of a spider's web, just as we can easily stop our bad habits or addictions if we do so right away. But gradually they encircle us tighter and tighter and tighter with more powerful force, as though we were bound in thick cords. Rabbi Yitzchak explained it this way: in the beginning, this desire comes in as a guest, and then later it becomes the landlord. At first, we willingly indulge our desires, inviting them into our lives because of the pleasure that they seem to bring. But gradually they take over our whole being, demanding a sort of payment of rent each and every day. I used to eat more carbs in my diet. Sugar is very addictive. And I used to snack frequently. Over the years, I found that I was gaining weight, a couple of pounds every year. So a few years ago, I decided to start cutting back on snacking and eating desserts. I had to work to develop new eating habits. I'm getting better, still have more work to do. This past year, I noticed that I've become addicted to the news. I watch the news on TV most nights, many times watching for more than 1 hour at a time. I also subscribe to several newspapers, reading several articles every day. I tell myself that I need to stay informed about what's going on in the world, and I actually believe that. But I have started to realize that I spend too much time doing that. I feel I have read, I need to read each article or watch this particular news program unless I miss something. So I'm going to start cutting back on watching news as well. And just as we can develop bad habits over time, we can also avoid developing good habits that we ought to be doing. Several years ago, I stopped going to the gym. As a result, I wasn't getting enough exercise. But since the pandemic, Diane and I have started to go for walks more frequently. We're trying to develop some good habits for exercise and sleep. It's still a work in progress, but we're working on it. I know that these are relatively modest examples of behaviors and obsessions that interfere with our lives, but you get the idea. We all have some ingrained bad habits that we want to escape from, and we all have good habits that we desire to cultivate. The point is that unlike the Pharaoh of Egypt, we do not have to harden our own hearts by doing things we know are not good for us, or by avoiding things we know we ought to be doing. In the Jewish tradition, we believe that we are thankfully blessed with a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer HaTov, and with God's help, we can choose to follow the Yetzer HaTov much more of the time. We can learn to overcome and control our bad habits and to develop good habits in their place that will enrich and enhance our lives and our friends and family and the world. May God bless us with the strength and determination to do so. Shabbat Shalom.